The second time was not a mistake. It was a declaration. I stood in my own driveway, the cool October air doing little to quell the heat rising in my neck, and stared at the scene. My graphite sedan was trapped, pinned against the garage door by a gleaming pearl-white SUV. A thick black cable snaked from the charging port I had installed myself. A weekend-long project of conduits and circuit breakers, and plugged directly into the side of the trespasser. Its charge indicator light pulsed with a soft green glow, a silent, smug heartbeat fed by my electricity. I saw her across the street, wrestling a giant, inflatable ghost onto a metal stake in her perfectly manicured lawn. Kara Milton, her severe blonde bob, sharp as a shard of glass, didn't move an inch in the breeze. She saw me looking and offered a tight, thin-lipped smile before turning back to her ghost, giving its base a firm kick. I walked over, the crunch of my dress shoes on the asphalt, the only sound in the suburban quiet. I kept my hands loose at my sides, a conscious effort to resist the urge to clench them into fists. "Kara," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. She turned, feigning surprise. "Ethan, something wrong?" "My car's blocked in, and your SUV is plugged into my charger again." I gestured toward the scene. "This is the second time. Please don't let it happen again." Kara tilted her head, the motion practiced and condescending. She wiped a speck of imaginary dust from her designer athletic jacket. "Oh, don't be so territorial. Your car was fully charged. I checked. We have to think of the grid. Besides," she added, her eyes glinting with a chilling entitlement, "community sharing is the future." The muscles in my jaw tightened, a familiar precursor to a migraine. The polite, neighborly script had been torn up and set on fire. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated encroachment, a test of boundaries. What Kara Milton didn't know was that my entire career was built on responding to such tests. As a cybersecurity auditor, I didn't argue with intruders. I logged their actions, identified their vulnerabilities, and systematically dismantled their access until they were locked out for good. She thought she was stealing a few kilowatt hours. She had no idea she had just tripped a silent alarm. Our life in Redwood Crest was supposed to be the antithesis of my job. My days were spent in the digital trenches, navigating the labyrinthine networks of multinational corporations, hunting for the subtle anomalies that betrayed a breach. I thrived on precision, on systems where every action left an immutable trace. Home was meant to be my sanctuary, a place of quiet order, governed by nothing more complex than the rhythm of the seasons and the gentle hum of the dishwasher. My wife, Lena, was the architect of that piece, a landscape designer with an artist's soul. She saw the world in gradients of color and texture, not in the binary of right and wrong that defined my profession. She was the reason we'd chosen Redwood Crest, a sprawling development of neo-craftsman homes where every lawn was an emerald carpet, and the greatest controversy was the annual debate over the acceptable shade of beige for exterior trim. Lena was conflict-averse. She believed a friendly wave and a freshly baked pie could solve most of life's problems. I loved her for it, but I knew some problems couldn't be baked away. Kara Milton lived directly across the street, and she was one of those problems. She held the most powerful unelected office in our suburban fiefdom chair of the Architectural Control Committee ACC. From this perch, she wielded the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs, like a scepter. Neighborhood gossip, exchanged over recycling bins and at the community pool, painted a consistent picture. Kara's enforcement of the rules was notoriously selective. Friends were allowed to build unapproved patios. Perceived rivals were cited for having a garden hose visible from the street. She was a petty tyrant disguised as a civic-minded volunteer, and her power was derived from the fact that no one had ever had the time, energy, or evidence to challenge her. Her husband, Ben, a perpetually weary-looking man who seemed to fade into the background, rarely spoke to anyone. He just drifted in his wife's wake, a silent testament to the exhausting nature of living with absolute certainty. We had lived in blissful ignorance of Kara's reign for 2 years. We kept our lawn immaculate, brought our trash cans in on time, and chose a mailbox from the pre-approved catalog. We were invisible, and in Redwood Crest. That was the goal. Then, I bought my electric car and installed the level 2 charger on the exterior wall of my garage, a decision made for convenience that inadvertently painted a target on my back. The first time I found her SUV plugged in, I'd left a polite, handwritten note on her windshield. The second time, the confrontation in the driveway, proved that politeness was a language she didn't speak. It was a currency she didn't value. "What are you going to do?" Lena asked that evening, her brow furrowed with worry as she trimmed the leaves of an orchid. She'd heard the whole exchange from the kitchen window. "I'm going to establish a clear and verifiable record of her actions," I said, my voice flat and clinical. Lena put down her shears. "Ethan, please don't turn this into one of your audits. She's our neighbor. Can't you just talk to Ben? Maybe he can reason with her?" "Her husband has no more influence over her than the man in the moon," I replied, pulling my laptop from my bag. "She responds to consequences, not conversation. I'm just going to provide them." Lena sighed, a sound heavy with the premonition of shattered peace. "Is this worth it? We have to live here. Think about the stress this is putting on us." "The stress of inaction is worse," I said, my fingers already flying across the keyboard. "Allowing a boundary to be repeatedly violated doesn't lead to peace. It leads to surrender." I ordered a high-definition, night vision security camera, the kind with motion-activated recording and crystal-clear audio. It arrived the next day. I spent that evening mounting it discreetly under the eaves of the garage, its lens aimed squarely at my driveway and charging station. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the intruder to return. It took 4 days. On a Tuesday night, just after 11:00 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the live feed. There she was. Kara's pearl-white SUV rolled silently into my driveway, its headlights off. The driver's side door opened, and she emerged, moving with a proprietary confidence that made my blood run cold. She unhooked the charging cable from its holster, plugged it into her vehicle, and the familiar green light began to pulse. She didn't even look around. She acted as if she owned the place. I watched for another minute, the camera capturing every detail, the timestamp, the license plate, her face clearly illuminated by the porch light. I saved the clip to a secure cloud server, then saved a backup to a separate encrypted drive. The pattern was now documented, irrefutable. The next morning, I walked across the street, phone in hand. Kara was watering her chrysanthemums, humming a cheerful tune. "Morning, Kara," I said. She glanced up, her smile faltering when she saw my expression. "Ethan, I have a video of you using my charger again last night, timestamped at 11:04 p.m., I said, keeping my tone level. "This is no longer a neighborly issue. This is trespassing and theft of utilities. It's the last time I will be speaking to you about it. If it happens again, this video goes to the police." I showed her the screen. The color drained from her face. The cheerful hum died in her throat. For a fleeting second, I saw not arrogance, but pure, unadulterated fury. She had been caught, and she knew it. She scoffed, trying to recover her composure. "Don't be so dramatic. It's a bit of electricity." "It's my electricity, on my property. The next conversation will be with an officer." I turned and walked away, The silence behind me was more menacing than any shouted threat. Later that day, as I expected, the SUV returned. It didn't pull into my driveway. It pulled into hers. But the message was clear: she was calling my bluff. So I called hers. I filed a formal report with the Redwood County Sheriff's Department for trespassing and theft of utilities. I provided the video file, my electricity bills showing the spike in usage, and a log of the previous incidents. I knew the monetary value was small, likely too small for criminal charges. The police dispatcher even warned me it would probably be deemed a civil matter. But that wasn't the point. The point was the official record. The point was the visit. 2 days later, a squad car rolled down our quiet street and parked in front of Kara Milton's house. I watched from my office window as 2 deputies walked up her slate pathway. The conversation on her doorstep was brief, but I could see her rigid posture, her hands gesturing wildly. She was being officially warned, on her own turf, in front of the entire neighborhood. It was a public humiliation, a direct challenge to the authority she had cultivated so carefully. The war had begun. The first shot in her counteroffensive arrived 2 days after that. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet, bureaucratic, and slipped under my door. It was a courtesy notice from the Redwood Crest HOA, printed on cream-colored cardstock. "Dear Homeowner," it began. The font, a friendly, non-threatening sans serif. "A recent community standards review has noted that the color of your front door, navy blue, is not on the pre-approved palette. To maintain community harmony, please consult the architectural guidelines and submit a plan for remediation within 10 days. Thank you for your cooperation." The notice wasn't signed by a person. It was signed, simply, the ACC. But I knew exactly whose hand had guided the pen. The battle had moved from my driveway to the rulebook, and Kara Milton was the one who had written it. My first instinct was to treat the notice as a problem to be solved with logic. I spent an evening walking the entire subdivision, my phone in hand, discreetly photographing every front door that deviated from the official palette of beige, taupe, and muted gray. I counted 23 non-compliant doors, including a fire engine red one on a house 2 streets over and a cheerful sunflower yellow just around the corner. Armed with this evidence, I drafted a polite, formal response. I attached the photos, referenced the addresses, and pointed out that my navy blue door was the same color it had been when we purchased the house 2 years prior. A fact supported by the original real estate listing photos, which I also included. My argument was simple, and, I believed, irrefutable. This was a textbook case of selective enforcement. I emailed my response to the general address for the HOA Management Company, a faceless entity called Aspen Grove Community Management. For a week, I heard nothing. Then, on October 25th, the formal escalation arrived. The mail carrier required a signature. It was a certified letter from Aspen Grove. The certified letter, postmarked October 25th, felt heavier than its single page. Inside, the tone had shifted from friendly reminder to cold demand. It was a formal violation notice. It cited my property address and referenced a specific clause in the governing documents, CC&R, RER 7.4.C, exterior color palettes, which vaguely required all exterior colors to be in harmony with the community's overall aesthetic. My meticulously prepared evidence of other non-compliant homes was dismissed in a single sentence. The Board of Directors acts on formal complaints as they are received and does not engage in proactive enforcement. The letter gave me 14 days to either repaint the door or formally appeal the decision at the next board meeting. It also informed me that failure to comply would result in a fine of $100, followed by accruing daily penalties. It was signed by the board president, a man named Roderick Hale. But I could feel Kara's influence bleeding through the ink. The phrase "acts on formal complaints" was her shield. She was the one filing the complaint. And the board was her rubber stamp. Lena's anxiety spiked. "Just paint the door, Ethan," she pleaded, her voice tight with stress. "It's just paint. It's not worth fighting the entire HOA over." It was never about the paint. Lena. "It's about being targeted," I argued, though I could see the toll it was taking on her. "If I give in on this, what's next? The trim, the mailbox, the crack in the driveway. This is how people like her win. They wear you down with 1,000 paper cuts." Reluctantly, she agreed to let me appeal. I submitted the formal request and received a curt email confirming I was on the agenda for the November board meeting. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled faintly of chlorine and stale coffee. The board president, Roderick Hale, a man with slicked-back silver hair and a condescending smile. Marjorie Kent, the treasurer, whose spectacles seemed to magnify her disapproval, and a younger man named Darren, who looked profoundly uncomfortable, sat at a long folding table. Kara was not on the board, but she sat in the front row, notepad and pen in hand, radiating the smug aura of a prosecutor who knows the verdict is already in. When my turn came, I presented my case calmly and rationally. I showed the photos. I cited the dates. I explained that the door was pre-existing. Roderick Hale listened with theatrical patience, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Cole, thank you for your presentation. However, the ACC, chaired by Ms. Milton, reviewed your property upon receiving a formal complaint and found it to be in violation. The board sees no reason to overturn the committee's expert recommendation. The violation stands." He didn't even look at my evidence. The decision had been made before I'd even walked in the room. I stood there for a moment, the faces of my neighbors blurring around me. It was my word against the system, and the system was a closed loop, designed to protect its own. I had followed the rules, presented the facts, and been dismissed without a second thought. I realized then that to win this fight, I couldn't play by their rules. I had to audit their entire corrupt system. The day after the board meeting, on November 16th, the first notice of fine arrived, $100 due in 30 days. It was followed a week later by a second violation notice, this time for the dark green hose reel attached to the side of our house. It cited CC&R Fairer 9.2A exterior equipment, which stipulated that all garden hoses and reels must be stored out of sight from the street. A few days after that, a third notice appeared, citing a hairline crack in one of our driveway pavers as a violation of Fairer 6.5, maintenance of hardscaping. The paper cuts had begun. This was no longer a defensive battle. It was time to go on the offensive. My first step was a formal records request under our state's laws governing homeowners associations. I sent a certified letter to Aspen Grove Management requesting digital copies of the past 3 years of board meeting, minutes, both public and executive sessions, the complete annual budgets, all vendor contracts, and, most importantly, the full record of ACC applications and approvals. The management company stonewalled. They sent back a form letter claiming the request was overly broad and burdensome. I responded with a letter from a lawyer I'd hired, citing the specific state statute that mandated their compliance. A week later, a link to a password-protected folder appeared in my inbox. It was a data dump of poorly scanned PDFs, many of them blurry and disorganized. It was designed to be overwhelming, a bureaucratic smokescreen. For anyone else, it would have been, for me, it was a data set waiting to be analyzed. I spent the next week of nights and weekends turning my home office into a war room. I ran the PDFs through optical character recognition software, converting them into searchable text. I cross-referenced dates, names, and figures, building a relational database of the HOA's activities. The deeper I dug, the clearer the patterns became. The meeting minutes were a goldmine of dysfunction. Most decisions were made in executive session, and the public minutes were heavily redacted. I cross-referenced the budget with the vendor payment records. One name appeared with startling frequency: Greenscape Solutions, a landscaping contractor. They seemed to handle everything from mowing the common areas to seasonal planting to special projects. Their invoices were consistently 20 to 30% higher than competitors. Yet, the board, especially on motions seconded by Roderick Hale, approved them without question. In the ACC records, I found that Greenscape was the contractor behind nearly every major hardscaping project approved in the last 2 years, including several large patios and driveway extensions, and whose name appeared as the champion for Greenscape in the ACC meeting notes, praising their commitment to community aesthetics. Kara Milton. I cross-referenced the addresses of those major projects. One of them was Kara's own home. 6 months ago, she'd had a sprawling slate patio extension installed in her backyard. The ACC approval form was in the file, signed by her as ACC chair. She had approved her own project. It was a clear conflict of interest, but likely permissible if she had disclosed it. The problem was, the minutes from that meeting were almost entirely redacted. The paper trail was suspicious, but it wasn't a smoking gun. I needed more. I called Alex Chen, an old colleague from my early days in the industry. Alex had left the corporate world to start his own digital forensics firm. He was a master at navigating the arcane, often ignored corners of public records databases. An HOA dispute. He'd laughed over the phone. "Ethan, you used to hunt Russian hackers. Now you're fighting the garden committee. This is more complex than any phishing scam I've ever seen. Alex, there's money involved, and it smells bad. I have a trove of their internal documents, but I feel like I'm missing a piece of the puzzle, something outside their own records." "Send me what you have," he said, his tone shifting from amusement to professional interest. "And give me the property address of your antagonist. Sometimes the most damaging information isn't in their files. It's in the public domain, hiding in plain sight." I sent him everything. As I waited for Alex to work his magic, I kept digging through the CC&Rs, reading every line, looking for anything I could use. My eyes scanned over a section I had previously ignored, thinking it was irrelevant. It was Member 8.4.2, Setbacks and Easements. It contained unusually specific language about maintaining a 5-foot clearance from all property lines and a 10-foot clearance from any designated public utility easements (PUEs). I made a mental note of it, muttering to myself, "This seems unusually specific." It felt like a rule written in response to a past problem, a seed of a conflict planted long ago. 3 days later, Alex called. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice crackling with the excitement of a discovery. "I was pulling county tax records to see if Greenscape's business address was linked to anyone on the board. It wasn't. By the way, but while I was in the county recorder's system, I pulled the official plat map for your subdivision. It's an old document, from when the land was first developed." I could hear him clicking on his keyboard. "Every property in your section of the neighborhood has a 10-foot public utility easement running across the back of the lot. It's for power lines, sewer access, that kind of thing. Standard stuff." "Okay," I said, not yet seeing the connection. "Well," Alex continued, "I then pulled the satellite imagery from the county's GIS server and overlaid the plat map's easement lines onto the current view of the properties." He paused for dramatic effect. "Your neighbor, Kara Milton. Her beautiful new slate patio, the one built by her favorite contractor, Greenscape Solutions. It's not just a conflict of interest. It's built almost entirely inside the public utility easement. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. Wait, so her patio is illegal, not just by HOA rules, but by county law. Worse. Alex said, it's a violation of a recorded deed restriction. The utility company has the right to tear it up tomorrow with no notice, and no compensation if they need to access their lines. She built a permanent structure on land she doesn't fully control, and, as the ACC chair, she approved it herself. Suddenly, the redacted payments and the unwavering loyalty to Greenscape made perfect, sickening sense. It wasn't just about bad taste in contractors. It was about finding a company willing to break the rules, to build where they shouldn't, likely for a discounted price or, worse, a kickback. Kara wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was corrupt. She was weaponizing minor aesthetic violations against me and others to distract from her own significant, structural, and legally dubious violation. Alex emailed me the files, the original plat map from 1988, with the easement clearly marked, the recent high-resolution satellite photo, and the overlay showing the patio sitting squarely in the forbidden zone. This was the weapon I needed. It wasn't about my door color anymore. It was about a fundamental breach of the rules that governed the entire community, committed by the very person in charge of enforcing them. The paper trail now had a destination, and it led directly to Kara Milton's illegally constructed back porch. Just as I was absorbing the impact of Alex's discovery, the final shoe dropped. On November 30th, another certified letter arrived. This one had a different, more ominous weight. The header was in a stark, bold font, Notice of Intent to Place Lion. The letter stated that my unpaid fines for the door, the hose reel, and the driveway crack now totaled over $1,500 if the amount was not paid in full within 30 days. The HOA's attorneys would place a lien on my property. A lien. The word itself was a threat. It would cloud the title to my home, affect my credit, and, if left unresolved, could eventually lead to foreclosure. It was the HOA's nuclear option. The 30-day deadline was my ticking clock. At the same time, Kara, likely sensing my investigation was getting closer to the truth, escalated her own campaign. She took to the neighborhood Facebook group, a toxic swamp of passive aggression and curtain-twitching gossip. She didn't name me directly, but her posts were unmistakable. So sad when new residents refuse to embrace the community standards that protect all of our property values. She wrote, "It takes a village to maintain harmony, but only one person to disrupt it." Comments poured in from her allies. "I heard he's been harassing the management company with endless demands for paperwork. What is he hiding?" another wrote. A narrative began to form. I was the troublemaker, the litigious outsider, the one who couldn't be a team player. The social pressure began to weigh on Lena. Neighbors who used to wave now averted their eyes. A woman she considered a friend canceled their weekly coffee date with a flimsy excuse. "They're siding with her." "Ethan," Lena said one evening, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "They think we're the problem. I went to the community mailboxes today, and Betty from down the street just turned and walked away from me." The conflict was no longer confined to letters and emails. It had spilled into our daily lives, poisoning the sanctuary we had tried to build. The personal stakes were now higher than ever. It was during this low point that I struck up a conversation with George Peterson, an elderly widower who lived a few houses down. George was a fixture in the neighborhood, known for his immaculate rose garden and a collection of cheerful, slightly chipped garden gnomes that technically violated an HOA rule about lawn ornaments. I saw him wrestling with a heavy bag of mulch and went over to help. As we worked, he looked over at my house. "Heard you're in the board's crosshairs," he said. his voice a gravelly rumble. "You could say that," I replied grimly. He paused, leaning on his shovel. "I was on the board, back in the early days. It wasn't like this. We were neighbors helping neighbors. Now, it's something else." He looked me square in the eye. "Kara's been running things her way for a long time. People are afraid of her. But fear only works until someone stands up to it. Be careful, son," he added, his tone turning serious. "When you go hunting for monsters, you can become one yourself. Don't let this fight turn you into her." His words stuck with me. He was right. Winning wasn't enough. I had to win the right way. I had to prove I wasn't just another version of Kara. Seeking revenge, I was seeking justice. His friendly, technically non-compliant garden gnome became a symbol in my mind, a reminder of the human element in this fight, of the difference between rules that protect and rules that punish. With the lean deadline looming and George's advice echoing in my head, I began to assemble my presentation for the one forum I couldn't be shut out of: the annual HOA meeting. It was 2 weeks away. I registered for a 5-minute speaking slot during the open forum. 5 minutes. That's all I would have to dismantle Kara Milton's entire regime. The clubhouse was packed for the annual meeting, the air thick with the scent of cheap coffee and simmering resentment. Most homeowners showed up once a year to vote on the budget and re-elect the board. A civic duty performed with all the enthusiasm of a dental cleaning. But tonight was different. Kara's smear campaign and the whispers of my investigation had created a palpable tension. People weren't just here to vote. They were here for the drama. The board, Roderick, Marjorie, and Darren sat at the head table, looking uncomfortable under the scrutiny. Kara sat in the front row, a portrait of serene confidence, her notepad open. Behind the board, a large projector screen displayed the meeting agenda. When the open forum began, my name was called. A digital countdown clock appeared on the screen, its red numbers glowing 500. I walked to the podium and plugged my laptop into the projector. My own presentation replaced the agenda. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice, when I spoke, was steady. "Good evening. My name is Ethan Cole, and I live at 214 Willow Lane. For the past 6 weeks, my family has been the target of a selective and punitive enforcement campaign by the ACC. I believe this campaign is not about community harmony, but about personal retaliation." 4:55. The first slide appeared. It was a grid of 24 photos. One was my navy blue door, marked with the date of my violation notice. The other 23 were the other non-compliant doors in Redwood Crest, each one untouched by the HOA. "This is what selective enforcement looks like," I said, as murmurs spread through the room. "The board claims it only acts on complaints. So, I have to ask who is filing these complaints against me." While ignoring dozens of identical issues, I let the question hang in the air, my eyes briefly meeting Kara's. Her smile tightened. 3:50. The next slide loaded. It was the official Redwood County plat map from 1988. I used my laser pointer to trace the dotted line running across the back of the properties on our street. This is a public utility easement, recorded on every deed in this section. As per CC&R section 8.4.2, no permanent structures are to be built within this 10-foot easement. 2:45. I clicked to the next slide. It was a high-resolution satellite photo of Kara Milton's backyard. The plat map's easement lines were overlaid in red. Her sprawling slate patio, her prized home improvement project, sat almost entirely within the red box. A collective gasp went through the room. This patio, the one championed and approved by our ACC chair, is in direct violation not only of our CC&Rs, but of a legally recorded public easement, I stated, my voice ringing with clarity. Roderick Hale's face had gone pale. Kara was staring at the screen, her composure finally cracking. 150. Next slide. A screenshot of the HOA's budget, showing the line item for common area landscaping. Beside it, a list of redacted payment approvals to Greenscape Solutions, the same company that built Kara's illegal patio. For 2 years, the board has exclusively used a contractor who is 30% more expensive than their competitors, and who was willing to build an illegal structure for the head of the committee that was supposed to be overseeing them. I believe this constitutes a serious conflict of interest and warrants an immediate, independent financial audit. The room was buzzing now. People were turning to look at Kara, who was frozen in her seat. 055. I had them. I could have ended there, leaving Kara to be devoured by the anger of her neighbors. But then I thought of George, and his warning about becoming a monster. I clicked to my final slide. It was a bright, cheerful photo of George's front yard, his beloved, technically non-compliant garden gnome, smiling from amidst the roses. But my point tonight is not to get Kara Milton in trouble, I said, my tone softening. The moral twist. It's not even to get my friend George here in trouble for his gnome. A few people chuckled, breaking the tension. My point is that for years, we have allowed our governing documents to be used as weapons to hurt and intimidate each other, when they should be used to protect our shared investment and our quality of life. Year 020. I looked out at the faces of my neighbors. They were listening. These rules have been weaponized because they are vague, outdated, and selectively enforced. Therefore, I make a motion to forgive all current aesthetic violations on the books for everyone, and a second motion to establish a resident-led committee, open to all, to review and propose updates to our bylaws to make them fair, clear, and immune to abuse. 005. The clock was ticking down. I believe in rules, but I believe in fairness more. I looked at the timer. 0, row 1. I cede the remainder of my time. The clock hit 0, row 0. The room was utterly silent for 3 heartbeats. Then, it erupted. It wasn't just applause. It was a roar of catharsis, of pent-up frustration finally released. The aftermath of my 5-minute presentation was immediate and decisive. The carefully managed decorum of the meeting shattered. Before Roderick Hale could even regain control, George Peterson stood up, his voice booming with newfound authority. I second Mr. Cole's motions, he shouted over the din. Hands shot up across the room. The motion to forgive all aesthetic fines passed with a nearly unanimous show of hands. The motion to form a resident-led review committee passed just as overwhelmingly. The board was in disarray. Their authority evaporated in the face of a united community. Someone from the back of the room, a woman who had been cited for her children's basketball hoop, made a third motion. I move for an immediate freeze on all fines and legal actions, pending a full, independent financial audit of the HOA's books and contracts. The motion was seconded and passed in a thunderous wave, effectively neutralizing the lien threat against my home. Roderick Hale, his face ashen, tried to call the proceedings out of order, but no one was listening to him anymore. Kara Milton sat through it all, a statue carved from ice. As residents began filing out, buzzing with plans for the new committee, a few people stopped by my chair to shake my hand or offer a quiet thank you. They didn't see me as a warrior who had vanquished a foe. They saw me as a neighbor who had offered a reasonable path forward. Lena stood beside me, squeezing my hand, her eyes shining with relief and pride. As the room emptied, Marjorie Kent, the treasurer, approached the podium and announced that in light of the questions raised about vendor contracts, Kara Milton would be asked to recuse herself from all ACC activities. Effective immediately. It was a bureaucratic coup de grace, stripped of her position, her credibility, and her power to intimidate. Kara finally stood up. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. She simply walked out of the clubhouse. Her husband Ben, trailing a few steps behind her like a shadow. The war of attrition was over. The system she had expertly manipulated for years had been turned against her. Not through vengeance, but through transparency. We had won, not by tearing down the house, but by opening all the windows and letting the light in. Months later, Redwood Crest was a different place. The resident-led committee, with George Peterson as its reluctant but effective chairman, had drafted a new, streamlined set of architectural guidelines that were clear, fair, and focused on safety and structural integrity rather than petty aesthetics. The independent audit had uncovered years of questionable accounting and conflicts of interest, leading the community to vote overwhelmingly to terminate the contract with Aspen Grove Community Management and fire Roderick Hale from the board. The neighborhood felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere of constant surveillance replaced by a tentative, but growing, sense of genuine community. The navy blue door was no longer a symbol of defiance. It was just our front door. Kara and Ben Milton became ghosts. We saw them only occasionally, getting into their car or bringing in groceries, always separately and always in silence. The inflatable holiday decorations no longer appeared on their lawn. Their house, once a bastion of enforced perfection, seemed to shrink into itself. One mild spring evening, Lena and I were sitting on our porch swing, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky. I saw a figure walking slowly up our driveway. It was Ben, Kara's husband. He was alone. My body tensed instinctively, but his posture was anything but confrontational. He looked smaller, older, and profoundly tired. He stopped at the bottom of our porch steps, twisting the brim of a baseball cap in his hands. "Ethan." "Lena," he began, his voice raspy. I know it's late in the day for this, but I wanted to apologize for everything Kara put you through." Lena and I exchanged a look. "Thank you, Ben," she said softly. "That means a lot." "She's not, well," he continued, struggling for the words. "This was never about electricity, or the door, or any of that. She got fixated." He took a deep breath, and the story that had been buried for years finally came out. About 10 years ago, before we moved here, Kara's younger brother worked as a comptroller for a logistics company. He made some mistakes, bad investments with company funds, trying to cover his losses. He was in deep. Ben wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your firm, the one you were a partner at back then, was hired to do a forensic audit. You were the lead on the project. You found the discrepancies. He was fired. Faced charges. It ruined him. It broke their family." I stared at him, my mind reeling, trying to connect the dots to a decade-old audit, one of hundreds I had led. I vaguely remembered the case a mid-level executive, a clear pattern of embezzlement. It had been a straightforward job. "Kara never forgave the man who signed that audit report," Ben said, his voice barely a whisper. "She blamed you for everything. When you moved in across the street, she saw it as some kind of cosmic injustice, stealing your electricity. It was her petty way of getting something back from you. Then it just spiraled. It became an obsession. She wanted to ruin your perfect life, the way she felt you'd ruined her brother's." The revelation settled over me, heavy and suffocating. The entire, months-long nightmare, the notices, the fines, the lien, the public humiliation. It was never a random act of a neighborhood Karen. It was a deeply personal, meticulously planned vendetta, a ghost from a past I never even knew was haunting me. I had been fighting a battle without ever understanding the true cause of the war. Ben gave a final, sad nod. Anyway, I'm sorry, he said, and turned, walking back across the street into the quiet darkness of his home. I sat there on the porch swing next to my wife, the peaceful suburban night suddenly feeling vast and complex. I had won the battle for Redwood Crest, but the realization of Kara's true motive felt like a loss of a different kind. It was a chilling reminder that the conflicts we see on the surface are often just the visible ripples of much deeper, hidden currents of pain and history. The war was never about a navy blue door or a charging cable. It was about a ghost,